Hola, buenas tardes a todos. Muchas gracias por venir. Muchas gracias al Museo Arqueológico Nacional por acoger esta conferencia. Especialmente gracias a su director, Andrés Carretero, que nos acompaña hoy, por convertir el Museo Arqueológico en un centro de una intensa actividad arqueológica que indirectamente sirve para defender e impulsar la arqueología española y también el contexto internacional de la arqueología española. Así que todos los arqueólogos o que directa o indirectamente trabajamos en arqueología tenemos que estar muy agradecidos a Andrés por la labor que desde que él dirige el museo está realizando esta institución. También aprovecho para mandar un cariñoso recuerdo a Mari Carmen Pérez Díez, que está de baja y que esperemos que se recupere pronto. Y bueno, agradecer también, por supuesto, la presencia de la conferenciante, la doctora Diana Craig-Patch, que es la jefa del Departamento de Arte Egipcio del Museo Metropolitan de Nueva York, que ha tenido la amabilidad de compartir con nosotros esta tarde algunas de las recientes adquisiciones del Museo Arqueológico, adquisiciones que se han llevado a cabo bajo su dirección y que vais a tener, creo, el placer de disfrutar y de alguna forma viajar con ellas esta tarde. Diana, además de ser una gran egiptóloga y una gran conservadora de museo, es una gran amiga desde hace ya bastante tiempo y para mí es un placer tener la oportunidad de presentarla esta tarde. Diana terminó su tesis doctoral en la Universidad de Pensilvania en 1991. Hizo su tesis doctoral sobre la evolución o cambios de modelo de asentamientos en la época predinástica y protodinástica. Ese mismo año, en 1991, se incorporó al Departamento de Arte Egipcio del Metropolitan de Nueva York, ¿no? Realizando sus labores de conservadora, en 2003 llevó a cabo una exposición sobre el obelisco que hoy se levanta en Central Park, que se llama la aguja de Cleopatra o Cleopatra's Needle, ¿no? Se hizo una exposición en torno al obelisco y el significado de los obeliscos en el arte egipcio, en la arquitectura egipcia. Tenemos la gran suerte también de contar con la presencia del embajador de Egipto en Madrid, que además es nieto de uno de los primeros egiptólogos egipcios, ¿no? El doctor Selim Hassan. His Excellency, welcome. It's a great pleasure to have you with us. Su Excelencia el embajador de Egipto en España es un gran defensor y conocedor del arte egipcio y de la arqueología egipcia desde genética, desde su abuelo, y es verdad que quiere y arropa mucho a las misiones españolas que trabajamos en Egipto. Thank you very much, Mr. Ambassador. Como iba diciendo, Diana se incorporó al Metropolitan en 1991. En 2003 llevó a cabo esta exposición sobre el obelisco de Central Park y en 2012 coordinó una exposición fantástica sobre el arte predinástico que se llamaba The Dawn of Egyptian Art. Fue una exposición magnífica, el catálogo es una obra de referencia para cualquier estudio de predinástico, de cultura predinástica. Y además de los trabajos mencionados y de extensas publicaciones de época predinástica, de arqueología del Reino Medio y también de joyería de los comienzos de la dinastía XVIII, Diana también está muy interesada en la joyería de comienzos de la dinastía XVIII. Diana es codirectora desde hace 10 años de una misión arqueológica que lleva a cabo el Metropolitan Museum en Malkata, en el palacio de Amenhotep III en el West Bank, en Luxor, en la antigua Tebas, ¿no? Hoy nos va a hablar, como decía, de 5 objetos que ha adquirido el museo bajo su dirección y que tienen una interesante historia detrás y a su alrededor, y con ello nos va a deleitar. Thank you very much, Diana, for coming to Madrid and for sharing with us the recent acquisitions of your department. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really enjoying my stay here. I've never been to Madrid before, so this has been very exciting. And I want to thank you all for coming to listen to this tonight. I do want to apologize that this will not be in Spanish. I wish I spoke Spanish, but you don't want to hear the few words I can say. So you will have to follow in English, and I will try to be slow and very clear. Tonight's presentation is going to be about 5 objects at the Met that were acquired in the last 6 years since I became head of the department. They are, when we acquire a piece of art, an enormous amount of work goes into the research, and much of that eventually gets published in a scholarly way, but it isn't available on a broader level, and because it's too much to go into label copy. So I thought that tonight you might enjoy looking at a series of short stories about one from each of these objects that gives you some inside information on the history of the piece and something you might not just learn from the label copy. The first one I want to talk to you about is called The Coffin of Nedjemankh. From his style, he dates somewhere between 100 BC and 50 BC. It is a spectacular piece, and we are very lucky to get it. We can't date it very well because, surprisingly, there is no cohesive study of Ptolemaic and Roman coffins. That just needs to be done. It's something that any one of you who is a student could think about doing. We just don't have a clear history of these coffins, so we can only roughly date him. Gilded coffins are rare, especially before 300 BC. As you know, there are very, very few of them. The most famous, of course, is Tutankhamun. But after 300 BC, gilding a coffin was more popular. Maybe gold was more available, it's hard to tell. The gilding is very, very thin. So although Nedjemankh is in superb condition and makes him a very fine example, there are actually quite a few gilded coffins in collections around the world, many of which, of course, are in the Cairo Museum. The 2 you see here, one of them is in Barcelona, the one that is on the right, and the other one is actually not a complete coffin, but it's a spectacular series of pieces whose designs are in repoussé, and that is at the Louvre. And I noticed yesterday when I was looking at the collection upstairs in the Museo that you have actually another one that is similar to the one in the Louvre. It doesn't have the mask, but it has the other parts that are all done in repoussé. So another example of this kind of gilding is actually right here. So the big question that should come up first is, how were we able to acquire a gilded coffin? And that's an excellent question. I was contacted by a dealer, a French dealer, who was representing a private collector who had had the piece in his collection since, or in the family's collection since 1971, with an export permit from Egypt, dating to that time. And the dealer you see up here is his letterhead from his store, which was located across the street from Shepherd's Hotel in Cairo. And he's a known dealer. And the document, the export license, had his family, his heirs were selling it because he had died, which was the case in 1969, so 71 made sense. We spent over a year doing the research on the provenance because we do not take it lightly at the Met. It has to meet a 1970 rule, or it has to be posted online on the Association of the American Museum Directors website. Its authenticity of the export license seems to be, to us, good. It's stamped in multiple colors. It has it's signed by the name of somebody that is in the antiquity service in that time period. So we acquired the coffin. Nedjemankh was affiliated with a temple his entire career. He holds 4 priestly titles: priest, Semirov priest, priest who adorns the divine image, and the priest of Harishef. On the screen in front of you, you see the wonderful little amulet from the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston, in the United States, that shows you Harishef. And this is a site that many of you are going to be familiar with because the Museo excavated it, and you have a whole series of finds upstairs in the galleries. Harishef is a cosmic deity. He is also a fertility deity associated with the sun god Re and at times with Osiris. He is the principal god at Heracleopolis Magna, and he has a long history from the early dynastic period all the way through the Pharaonic period into the Ptolemaic and Roman times. And the depiction on the right, I've included not because it has anything to do with Ptolemaic period or Harishef, but because it shows you a priest who is the adorner of the divine image. You can see him tying a collar, piece of jewelry, onto a statue, which is what that particular priest does. And that is apparently something Nedjemankh did for some portion of his life in the temple. The coffin is made from cartonnage, which is a material of glue and linen that is formed into the shape of the anthropoid coffin and then covered with a plaster layer. In this coffin, the decoration is particularly interesting, and I will show you some close-ups. Here you can see a cross-section of the cartonnage, so you can see the layers that were used to make this container. And you can see on the picture on the right is the decoration, which is extensive. There's an elaborate collar on the front. There are a whole series of vignettes, funerary vignettes. There are details of sons of Horus on the side and a big winged beetle and a vulture on the headdress. And all of these were made by first painting the decoration in red line, which you can see, and then covering it with something that I liken to cake frosting. In other words, it's called pastilia. It is a type of decorative, it's a decorative technique in which the plaster is applied in a raised pattern, so that they use the red lines and they put plaster on top, just like you would decorate a cake. That was allowed to dry, and then they gilded the front and silvered the inside. So you can see how detailed this is. And pastilia in Egypt, this sort of decoration is extremely rare. You see pastilia on the base of the lappets of wigs on coffins, but you rarely see it covering such a large area. The gold, the gilding, is incredibly thin. In fact, it's so thin that when they put it down to burnish it, it tore everywhere that it was raised. That's how thin the gold was. To me, it's amazing they could get it that thin. The inside, from the chest up through the head, had sheets of silver alloy. So it was really foil, not gilding. And you can see in the picture the strips as they were laid down. They are all blackened now. They can never be made silver again. But that's very interesting too. So, was this enough for me to consider in a conversation with the members of my department whether this was a piece we should acquire? And it really wasn't, because to have a gold coffin isn't really the reason to get it. And I'll tell you what the reason is, and this is what makes it an amazing piece. Right above his feet, where his name and his titles and his genealogy are inscribed, His mother's name was Barnabas. That's all there. And then there's a series of other inscriptions, mostly typical. But then there's also a fragment of a hymn. And the hymn goes, O gold, O gold, O flesh of the gods, O flesh of the gods, O silver, O silver. Now the hymn is known, but finding it on a coffin where Nedjemankh commissioned the front to be gilded like the hymn and the inside to be silvered like the hymn, so that he was covered in gold and silver, and he was the flesh and the bones of the god, the sun and the moon, and the right eye and the left eye of Harishef, who has a silver and gold eye. And so the coffin was designed to divinize Nedjemankh and to take him from this world into the next world. And that is the reason that we decided it should be in our collection. The Haraga Treasure. In 1913-14, Reginald Engelbach excavated at a site called Haraga, just outside of the Fayoum, which is not that much farther south from Cairo. It was a cemetery site, and he excavated a series of tombs, of which one was tomb 124. Inside was a man and a woman's skeletal remains. It was badly disturbed, but he also found broken pottery vessels, a stela above ground, a collection of very fragmented jewelry, and some very nice small calcite vessels. The assumption was the man and the woman were related, although the dating for the jewelry seems slightly earlier than the dating for the pottery. This is all part of the history of excavation in Egypt. It was a sponsored dig. The objects from that excavation were divided following partage. A portion of it stayed in Egypt, and a portion was sent to the institutions that supported Engelbach's excavation. In the fall of 2014, Bonham's, a large auction house in London, featured a collection of calcite vessels and fragmentary jewelry from tomb 124 in Haraga. The archaeological world was shocked, to say the least, and up in arms in online and in some publications, because this was a division from partage. It had been given by Egypt to an archaeological institution, the St. Louis Society, which was a division of the Archaeological Institute of America, and so selling it was really not something that should have happened. So I reached out to Bonham's to see if I could negotiate a sale without it going to auction, so that this group of objects would stay together. Because once it went to auction, they would have been dispersed. They were in two separate lots. Some of the lots might not have sold, and the pieces would no longer be together from the same tomb. Luckily for us, Bonham's thought it was a good idea given the negative publicity, and I was able to arrange the sale. So these objects came to the Met. And I'm going to talk about the jewelry today, although these wonderful calcite vessels, several forms of which are either unique or very rare, are beautiful. And I'm really glad that they are on display so that you can see them. They're really elegant. But it is the jewelry that is of particular interest, partially because that is one of my areas of specialization. And so in the jewelry was a group of little pendants. All of the jewelry is silver, and you know how rare that is in Egypt, since most elite jewelry is in gold. This is all in silver. There were a series of pendants in silver that had inlaid shell, and then a series of cowries, which are at the bottom of the picture, that of course are normally found, and these probably were, with beads strung in a girdle that would have been worn over a woman's hips. There were three rare or unique pieces, a a cartouche of Senwosworth II, a Horus of gold inlaid piece on the right, and in the center a unique element that is three-dimensional. It is a bee sipping nectar from a flower. All of these are inlaid in lapis, carnelian, and turquoise, as are these fragments, which come from a pectoral. Now, pectorals are fairly rare. You know them from the Middle Kingdom, and we know them from the New Kingdom. There are the ones that Tutankhamun had. There are quite a few of them from his tomb, are very well known, but there aren't so many from the Middle Kingdom. The ones that we have are largely royal, although private ones are known as well. So what I'm showing you here on the left are the three private pectorals that are known from the Middle Kingdom, and then the rest are royal pectorals. The top one in the center is, of course, Sid Hathor unit at the Met. The one below is Sid Hathor unit in Cairo. And the rest of the pectorals that are royal are in Cairo. Haraga holds its own, even though it is very fragmentary. I'll show you some pictures where you can see pectorals worn on private people. And this is, of course, the pectoral of Sid Hathor unit, which is, I believe, part of a set of cowrie, a cowrie girdle and anklets and bracelets. This is the reconstruction that's done by the artist at the Met of all of those little bits and pieces that are part of the Haraga pectoral, so that you begin to see what it looks like. It has a pair of wadjet eyes at the top, two bees facing each other on either side of a Hathor emblem. And it is the Hathor emblem that is particularly interesting to me, because when you look at the other two private pectorals, they have the same formula. It is a Hathor emblem or a Hathor fetish. The one over here is a Hathor fetish flanked by two elements. And the elements vary, but they're all significant symbols. Capped by wadjet eyes, all the same. So the pattern of these pectorals is very consistent. But all associated with Hathor. Now, the royal pectorals don't have Hathoric symbols themselves, but interestingly, Lana Troy first said, and it has been agreed upon by a number of Egyptologists at this point, that the princesses, the ones wearing royal outfits with pectorals, were buried around the pyramids of kings in order to assist in their rebirth. So this is something I want you to keep in mind, that these women who have pectorals and cowrie girdles are placed around the burials of kings to help them be reborn. And that is a role that Hathor is associated with. So this whole concept, the Hathoric idea, I found interesting. So I wanted to look at the bigger picture of sets of jewelry and not just individual elements. And so this, of course, partially has to do with the fact that the royal outfits, the royal pectorals come with outfits of jewelry. They were found with groups of jewelry. And if we look at, in particular, fertility figurines from the Middle Kingdom, like the one on the right, they almost always wear cowrie girdles, and many of them are wearing shells around their neck, just like the ones you see in the center. The woman on the far left is also, she doesn't have a girdle, but she is wearing a shell. And if you hunt, they occur, not a lot, but they are around on female statuary. They also are private women as well as royal women. This one is Senebtisi, who was excavated by the Met in 1906. She has a necklace full of shells, and she's wearing a girdle. Now, the girdle doesn't have cowries, but it has acacia beads, which are later associated with the same element. They're Hittite, or believed to be Hittite. Although I can't quite figure out why, but that's what the literature says. So now we look back to this set from Haraga. And not only does it have a pectoral, but it has a necklace of shells, and it has a cowrie girdle. So one begins to wonder if the woman who was buried in this tomb didn't have some sort of function in a Hathor temple. She contains the same kinds of groups of jewelry. Now, this is still a subject under study. I'm still working on it and collecting it and pulling it together, but it's a very interesting thing, especially when you look at the stela that was found right above the tomb. Now, again, I have to say the tomb is disturbed. The stela was not in situ, but it was above the tomb. And if you look at the stela, it's very unusual because most stela from the Middle Kingdom are dedicated to a husband and wife. The primary person on the stela is male, and he's often accompanied by his wife, who receives the same offerings in the stela. On this one, the focus of the stela is female. It is the lady, and I never get her name right, Tenhab, okay, that's who it's dedicated to. And the gods on the statue are Osiris, funerary statue makes sense, and Hathor. But it is a Hathor of a shrine located about 30 kilometers away from Haraga. So one wonders if this jewelry, which must have been a royal gift because it was unique and elaborate, elite, wasn't given to a woman just like the other ones we've seen that are very sophisticated and high-end jewelry by the king to someone who is performing rites on behalf of Hathor in a temple where she lived not very far away. It's a very interesting thing to just consider. The Kemes Stela. Funerary stela are very important parts of Egyptian culture. They are known from the early dynastic period, 3100 BC, all the way through to the Roman period. Burials are marked by the stela. It is a way of making sure that the deceased has offerings forever. Three-dimensional stela, as opposed to two-dimensional stela, are extremely rare. Most of the ones that you're familiar with are, of course, two-dimensional. They are a slab, they are decorated, and they're placed in front of the tomb. They're set into walls. In the earlier part, they were freestanding, but they weren't decorated on the back. But there are a very small group, 5 that I know of, that have been published, that are three-dimensional. That means that they actually stand alone and are decorated on all sides like a monument. And the Kemes Stela is one of these 5 and one of the best. Just so you know, it was sawn into 2 parts at some point, probably to move it. We acquired it in 2014 with a history that went back to Germany prior to 1970. It probably goes back into the early 60s because when it went on sale with one of the other 4 architectural stela that had been published in the 60s when it was with a dealer in Luxor. And so since they both were owned by the same person in Europe and one of them was published in Luxor, they probably were both with the same dealer in the early 60s. As I said, there are only 4 others known. These are 3 of the 4. One of them is in Cairo. A really fine example is in Vienna. And an example that is not well published is in Cairo, the one on the bottom. And then the last one is in a private collection, the one that was published in the early 60s. What is fascinating about this piece is that whoever conceived of it was incredibly creative because the decoration of the piece, all of the decoration actually communicates the entire tomb. It communicates the outside, the facade. It communicates the sarcophagus, the coffin, the offering stelas, and false doors. And they're all in one piece, which is really amazing. And the first one that I want to draw your attention to is on the bottom of the stela. That's the enclosure wall that comes back into popularity in the late 12th dynasty. And what is particularly exciting is that each one of those, in the panels, you can see the entrances. Each one of those is a named gate. Now, named gates are very rare. We don't know them many places, a few tombs, but this has the names preserved on a number of them. Several of the gates, we don't know what they mean, but the fact that they are there is very exciting. So the bottom part is the enclosure. The upper part, you can see the shape of the coffin, or the sarcophagus, the curved top with the ends. That's the sarcophagus. One side is covered in coffin texts, so that represents the coffin. You can see the mummiform figure of Kemes at one end. So those are the false doors. So each end has a false door. And then you can see the offering stela on this side. There was another one on the other side, but it's very eroded and in bad condition. My favorite part of this stela, and probably the reason, I mean, intellectually it's an amazing piece, but the part that appealed to me visually, and being in an art museum, that's also where I go, is the fact that at either end of this stela, at one end you have Kemes in prayer, in this world basically, and at the other end of the stela, he is mummiform and he has moved into the afterlife. So the stela actually takes him from one place, this world, into the next world, just by the depictions. And this side, of course, looks just like a 13th dynasty stela that you would recognize, a two-dimensional stela, and that helps very clearly date a piece that would be much harder to date. It has the multiple family members. You can see on this side, all the women are seated, and on the left, Kemes offers to his father and his mother. His grandfather is named, and in the middle, of course, his son offers to his father. Now, on the far right, there's a little cutout, and 13th dynasty was, I could date it quite well from the style, but I had a young man named Kei Yamamoto working in the department at the time we acquired this, and he looked at it and he said, oh, I can date this to the second quarter of the 13th dynasty, which is about a 50-year period, because of the style of the pots. Apparently, those long necks and the shape of the shoulders have a very short lifespan. And all of this has been worked out for the 13th dynasty. And that, along with the fact that Kemes is holding on to his leopard tail, apparently another diagnostic attribute of the stela, helps us date it to within a 50-year stretch of Egyptian history, which I find amazing. The Hippo Goddess. Egypt, as many of you know, has three amazingly dangerous animals in antiquity: the lion, the hippo, and the crocodile. And they come together in a goddess that many of you know as Taweret. But we're going to look at something just a little bit different, although part of this group of representations of this deity. So there are the dangerous animals, just so you keep them in mind: the lion, the crocodile, and the hippo. None of them look very nice in those pictures, chosen for just that reason. And then you get to look at her, who is very different. She mingles the characteristics of those three animals. For she has the features of a hippo, the face of a hippo, and I'll show you this closer in a minute. The body of a pregnant woman, and although she doesn't have her lower half, when you look at her from the side, you can see how her belly is beginning to move out. She has the heavy, flat breasts of a woman that has borne children before. From the side, you can see the crocodile teeth, and you'll look for these in the next few pictures. And out of the back of her head rises organically the tail of a crocodile. It's just amazing. Now, she belongs to a group that we call Hippo Goddesses, and they need to be called that because there are 3 Hippo Goddesses you can't tell apart unless they're inscribed: Raret, Ippi, and Taweret. Taweret actually doesn't appear as a name until the New Kingdom. This acquisition came from the Kofler, a dealer in Switzerland who stopped selling by 1970, and it was his grandson by marriage that finished selling his collection. Now, the earliest reference to Hippo Goddesses is actually in Dynasty 5 pyramid texts, where Raret, that's the earliest name, nurses the king. Eunice is nursed by Raret. So we clearly know that that's a function. She's a nurse. Most of the representations of her don't appear until the end of the Old Kingdom, around 2200, and they appear in tiny little amulets. That's the earliest representations we have. We have an inscription that says she's a nurse, but we only start to get representations of her at the end of the Old Kingdom. And you can see here, she's shown as a pregnant, she's shown pregnant with a closed mouth and a tail that runs up her back. But the details aren't very clear because they're almost always about this big. It isn't until the Middle Kingdom that you begin to see her in larger depictions, sometimes as a coal tube, sometimes depicted on coal tubes, sometimes, as in the bottom one, on a feeding cup. There are a few three-dimensional models, but most are representations. In the Middle Kingdom, three-dimensional representation, sculpture really appears in the New Kingdom, like the two at the top, where you have one in bright blue, and then the representation on the coal tube is New Kingdom. Although she is always said to be associated with pregnant women and newborn babies, and she may well be, the proof of that is not clear, because the inscriptions for her, as far as I've found so far, and I haven't been through everything, but I'm working on it, is that she is a protector. She protects. She comes to protect. Protect people, but it never says she comes to protect children. She's often inscribed on magic wands that have been used to protect children, but there are other places where it just says protect. So we know that she is a very powerful deity, almost demon-like, especially in the Middle Kingdom, but we don't know specifically what else she does. However, you can actually, if you study the characteristics, begin to get a feel for how to date representations of Taweret. And when I started this, and I've been working on it, and this is developed into a huge project, I assumed that there was something out there that I could just simply open up and figure out where she would date. Well, there isn't. However, at this point, I've been able to narrow characteristics that help you put representations of Taweret, Ippi, or Raret into a category, a time period, and that's what you see up here. The Old Kingdom, the Late Old Kingdom and First Intermediate representations, the mouth is generally closed, and the tail starts at the back of the head and goes down, and we don't have, the hands are in front, but we don't have much else. In the Middle Kingdom, the tail is very distinctive. It often actually is a real crocodile that goes up above the back of her head. Her mouth is open, she's fierce, she often carries snakes and knives, and she is often moving. She also has a ruff. If your representation has a ruff, it's Middle Kingdom. It's not earlier, it's not later. In the New Kingdom, she's easy. Taweret is where she appears. That's probably the name of many, but not all of them. But the one thing they all seem to have in this period is a wig. So if she's wearing a wig, She's New Kingdom. So where does our piece fall? She has no ruff, so she's not Middle Kingdom. She has no wig, so she's not New Kingdom. She has to be earlier than that. But where? And this was a very difficult thing to figure out. And I'm still not positive I have a very solid date on her. But it is interesting to look at the piece, because whoever carved this carved it in indurated limestone, which is a very hard limestone, very difficult to carve. It was something the Egyptians really liked using when they could get it, but it wasn't easy. And this one, once they started to carve it, they came across little geodes in the stone. They're little crystals. They're scooped out. I originally thought, you can see the scooped out on the shoulders and in the breasts. I originally thought they were just breaks. But when the conservator studied them, she said, no, they're crystals. They're little crystals. So when they carved it, they came across these pockets in the stone that popped out. They continued to use that stone, meaning to me that they were very interested in carving this piece in indurated limestone. When they were finished, they plastered the entire piece. All of those pockets were filled with plaster. The piece was plastered and then painted. And the bits of paint that are left are black on the nipples, black along the eyes, black little bits in the tail, and then red here and there elsewhere. There's a lot of red in the mouth. And the best example, although much later in history, is the wonderful piece from Daryl Medina, which is black and red. Very much the same color scheme as the one we have, which suggests to me that this is a color scheme for statues of Hippo goddesses for much of Egyptian history. And these pieces, neither of these are private pieces. These are pieces that probably functioned on a bigger scale. They're more shrine-like. They're not really little things that you would carry or have in a bedroom. They probably were something that were really dedicated to the worship of a Hippo goddess. In the case of the one from Daryl Medina, probably Taweret. So where do I date this wonderful piece? And now you can see all the elements of the animals. You can see how the crocodile's tail grows. You can see the lines on the side that indicate her connection to a lion. She also has tufts coming up here. And then if you look carefully on the side, you can also see the crocodile teeth. For me, having looked for many years at early sculpture, and I think this has to be early, it has to be Old Kingdom or earlier, she has no neck, has absolutely no neck. She has a closed mouth. And also one of the features that for me is very important about early sculpture is that early sculpture that is really dedicated to shrines, that are really representing a deity. She looks like she could move. All right? Later sculpture in the Old Kingdom and the New Kingdom, they're very formalized. They stand, they don't have this feeling of spontaneity where they're going to actually move. But in the late pre-dynastic and in the early dynastic and probably into the Old Kingdom, you get that. The Narmer baboon, he sits there, he's frozen in limestone, but he doesn't look like he's frozen. He looks like he could move. He has no neck, he has a closed mouth. The same is true for the lion cub. He sits there pulled back like he could move, but he doesn't. His teeth are nasty. He's not, everybody calls him cute, but this lion cub, if you look at him carefully, is anything but cute. He's just young. Really, he's just young. You really want him inside a case. So these late pre-dynastic, early dynastic animals have the same characteristics that I associate with this fragment of a Hippo goddess. I also looked at the new pieces found by the Japanese expedition at Saqqara. When you look at this lion goddess, she looks very traditionally pharaonic. She has the long, elegant female body wearing the dress. She has the ruff, and she could be any one of a number of deities from later times. However, if you look at her, she does have a reduced neck. It isn't as long as you would expect in later periods. That's the closest I can come. We're dealing with something that is a one of a kind at this point. Representations of deities prior to the Middle Kingdom are extremely rare. The few that exist are mostly in two-dimensional art. They're not in three-dimensional art. So the comparative material is really very small. But for me, I think that she's dated to the 3rd or 4th dynasty, early Old Kingdom. She could be earlier, but I'm afraid at this point to do that because I can't really prove it. But I think she shares those characteristics coming out of the late pre-dynastic, early dynastic time period. And you have to remember it is during this period that monstrous animals are well known. We don't know what they are, but they're animals that combine different elements of different animals, like the piece in the center that comes from Tel El Farka that nobody knows what that is. And you can see the composite animals that come off the great palettes of the late pre-dynastic and early dynastic period. Also, I do want to point out one other element that has its origins clearly marked in the pre-dynastic, even earlier than the late pre-dynastic. These hippo amulets, these ones in pink limestone, they're always in pink limestone, are pregnant. You can see that the bellies of these hippos touch the ground. And if you look at any other hippo from the pre-dynastic and Old Kingdom, if they don't belong to this category, their bellies are, you can see right underneath them. They aren't pregnant. So that is another early thing that connects to this particular fragmentary sculpture. Again, no answers, but really interesting information that isn't yet in label copy. And the last one that I want to talk to you about is just fun. It was the first purchase that I made when I was the new head of the department. Very scary step in my career. And, but it was one that was easy. So, the family of Neferkowit. Tomb 729 was a shaft tomb that Winlock dug in 1935 in Luxor, west bank of Thebes, near the edge of the cultivation, down from Deir al-Bahri and Tutmosis III's funerary temple. We received 111 objects from this tomb. It was a family tomb. It had 4 chambers, but only 2 chambers are relevant to the family of Neferkowit. You can see where the pit tomb entrance is with the red arrow. And there is a diagram of the tomb. Over here, you can see 2 large coffins with a lot of equipment, and on the other side, a whole series of coffins and a lot of very small coffins that are burials of later children. So Neferkowit and his wife, Renefer, were buried in the 2 coffins. Over there, I'm sorry, right and left is hard. I can't, I'm looking at it and thinking, how do I switch it? So on this side is Neferkowit and his wife, and over here, the 3 coffins that are in a row are his son, one of his daughters, and her husband. All right, they were all inscribed, we know their names, Amenemhet, Ruyu, and Baki. The tomb contained all sorts of objects, great objects, none of them very elaborate, but in a complete range of 18th dynasty burial goods, such as canopic boxes, pottery, cosmetic equipment, Book of the Dead papyri, the coffins, scarabs, heart scarabs, weapons, games, some jewelry. So a complete array. It was a really lovely find. Unfortunately, because it was so close to the cultivation, the dampness had seeped up into the tomb and all of the material and wood disintegrated, which you will see in the next picture. So here you can see the coffin of Amenemhet on the over here, and right next to him, what's left of the coffin of his sister Ruyu, and Baki, which was right next to her, has already been removed. And so now I'll show you just some of the things. You can see them in situ that we got from the tomb, really beautiful pieces of ceramic that were in the coffins. Almost everything except the large pottery was contained inside the coffins in this tomb. Ruyu, the sister, had a wonderful set of canopic jars that were not only in the box, but they were wrapped in linen with linen pads on top before the lid was put on, so that they were very carefully packed. There they are. They're very interesting because they all look up. They don't look straight like so many do. Her husband Baki's coffin was in slightly better shape. And it's interesting because the father and mother's coffins definitely were rishi, feathered, and so tied to the 17th dynasty, while the coffins of their 3 children were a little bit later in time, much more Hatshepsut and Thutmose III. Neferkauit was in the court of Hatshepsut. He worked for her. There, see, I told you the material was in the coffin, so you can see the groups of things at the bottom of this coffin. And there's one of the jars that came out of it. There were also a wonderful axe, which you see here, and then these bracelets. And I will tell you a little story about the bracelets because I always thought they were so interesting when I started working at the Met in the early 90s. Here were these wonderful woven bracelets. I've never seen anything like them. Jewelry was always an interest of mine, so I thought about them. It wasn't until I started to really read about the excavation that I found out that Winlock found a pile of beads, which he strung on one long string, and they came to the Met. Somebody at the Met didn't think the string was particularly attractive, so they wove it into bracelets. So you look at these and you think you're understanding something about the burial, and I have to tell you, you're not. They're wonderful examples of probably something that was in the souk in Upper Egypt at the time. You know those wonderful Nubian necklaces that you used to be able to buy? That's what it looks like it's based on. And he wasn't Nubian as far as we can tell. These are 2 of those beautiful blue faience bowls. The wife had them, Renefer had them. One of them came to the Met. And then, of course, sets of alabaster cosmetic vessels, which are so. And these are some wonderful pieces. The heart scarab of Neferkauit, which was set in gold. And he had a silver vessel to pour wine. And a very nice, I believe it's Egyptian blue cosmetic container. So, lovely tomb, something the Met has displayed for years, written up by Winlock. You know, we know it quite well. And so in the fall of 2012, just after I was appointed, a dealer in New York, whom we'd known for many years, a very fine dealer, came to me and he said, I have something I think you're going to want. So, okay. He said the piece had a long history. The dealer that had owned it in the 1950s had actually published it in the JEA, and it had then gone to a private collection in Switzerland. So it had a nice history. That was all fine. And when he showed it to me, he was absolutely right. It was something we wanted, because now Neferkauit and his family has a face again. It is a parastatue of Neferkauit and his wife, made by the daughter Ruyu, who also shows her husband Baku and her brother Amenemhet and her sister Amenhotep, all on the statue, and everyone was in that tomb except the daughter Amenhotep, and that's probably because she was married and in her husband's tomb. So all of the family members are there. So the piece must have been the statue that was above ground, marking the burial. We know that Thutmose III cleared the area during his reign to make his causeway for his funerary temple. At that point, he must have moved the shrines somewhere, sealed the burial with the causeway, so it was undisturbed until the Met excavated. But the shrines above ground were moved. Those statues were either repositioned somewhere else, or they were buried in a formal kind of way, in a ritual kind of way by Thutmose III. There is a statue of Ruyu and Baku, the daughter that dedicated it to her deceased mother, in Johns Hopkins. It was part of the Eaton collection, and it was acquired by Lord Salt, I don't know how he got it, in 1835. So these statues must have been discovered a very long time ago. But now, the two components have come together, and all of that equipment has a set of faces, and we have an idea of whom they belong to, something we can look at while we see all of the equipment. And that's a very nice sort of ending to this story. And with that, I'd like to say thank you very much for listening to me talk to you about the material at the Metropolitan, and I'm happy to answer any questions if you have any afterwards. Yes.
You're gonna get
You'll get a microphone.
I wanted to ask you about the pectorals. What's the significance of the pectoral itself? I mean, what's its function?
Well, most of the royal pectorals identify the king, so it has a royal name, and then the royal name is protected by the elements around it. So it's identification that the king, and then the king is protected. On the three private ones, they are Hathor. The Hathor face or the Hathor symbol is being protected in the same way that the king's name is. So it's emblematic. One assumes that it belongs to somebody who's carrying out a role that's associated with Hathor, because they all have that.
So the royal people were not the only ones who were allowed to wear it. Right?
Well, what's interesting about the royal ones is, of course, it's the king's name, but the pectoral is being found with those girdles, with the shells, which is the same thing that we see in a number, we see with the Haraga pieces, and then you also get girdles and shells with private individuals that don't necessarily have pectorals. I think pectorals are very rare. I think they are really major royal gifts. But this combination of shells and girdles seems to have this Hathoric function. And the Haraga treasure has that combination. It has the shells in both parts, and it has a pectoral, suggesting that the woman probably had a role in a temple. To me, that's what it suggests. I don't think these are arbitrarily, I think these are sets. I don't think they're just pieces you pick up. I think they're sets.
So kind of pectorals were from wealthy people, I assume, right? Not the royal ones, the private ones.
The private ones?
Yeah.
Say that again?
I mean, they were wealthy, the people. I assume they were wealthy because.
Well,
no
I
one
don't
could
know that
acquire.
they're wealthy. I think that they are royal gifts, meaning that they're honoring the individual, probably for a role the individual is playing. Royal gifts are almost always thank yous, at least from the later period, what it seems like the king bestows jewelry on people as a thank you. And I'm guessing they're bestowed on people to carry out rites. Probably, the royal women obviously are connected to the king. The private women, my guess, may be collateral members of the royal family, so they don't necessarily live with the king because they're the descendants of brothers or something, sisters, but they have this connection which might bring them into a cult. I mean, that's the logic behind it. Can I prove it? Working on it, but not yet.
Thank you.
Yeah, sure.
¿Alguna otra pregunta?
Last year I worked with the Uruk period in Mesopotamia, and one of the things that I studied was about those strange animals with those long
Right.
with the long necks.
The necks.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Is there any significance in Egypt about those necks, or?
We don't know. I think they're borrowed from Mesopotamia. I think they come in as iconography into Egypt from Mesopotamia because they appear there earlier. And then they're adapted by the Egyptians, but their use in the pre-dynastic is not very clear. Their necks are entwined. It seems like they're bringing parts together. But since there's no written language, I don't really know. They show up in Middle Kingdom, in some Middle Kingdom scenes, but again, I'm not sure that anyone has a really good idea what they're for in Egypt.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Hello, I'm doing a bit of research on the antiquities trade in Egypt, and I was curious, do you know what years Habib and Company were in operation?
No, there's not a lot of data, but there's a new book published by Hagen out of, I think it's Copenhagen, that has a list of all of the dealers in Egypt and what they know about them and the dates they operated.
What's that book called?
Basically the antiquities trade, but it's by Frederick Hagen, Hagen. If you type that in, it'll come up
Thank you.
because it's very new.
Thanks.
Very useful.
First of all, thank you for this good explanation of these pieces, and I get amazed by the three-dimensional stelas, but I don't get where they find in the private thumbs or royal thumbs.
It's an interesting question. I think that the discussion in my department, the gut feeling is that they are monumental and they're set up to commemorate, as opposed to being in front of a tomb, that they are more likely, especially because he's praying, that they are more likely to have been set up along one of these ritual causeways on terraces like you see at Abydos, where, you know, every year the procession for the burial of Osiris goes by. Apparently there's also a terrace in Upper Egypt at another site, and that these are probably set up as commemorative stela, not so much funerary stela in front of a tomb.
Thank you.
Yeah, can't prove it because none of them are found in situ, but that's, I think, makes sense for the elaborateness. It also, it moves the whole tomb there, which you wouldn't need with a stela in front of a burial.
Thank you.
Yeah.
¿Alguna otra pregunta? ¿Alguien se anima? Pues de nuevo muchas gracias, Diana, por tu
Thank you
conferencia.
very much, everyone.
Muchas
Enjoyed
gracias
talking to
al
you.
embajador por estar aquí.